So, Jed, the youngest of the group and the most inexperienced, right? How did you kind of draw them in?
Yeah, for sure. Just a lot of trickery, deceit, blackmail. It's important, particularly if you're a young writer, to be getting into those experiences, saying yes to those adventures. It's a really good question. I'm doing Kickstarter because I really like the sort of direct connection that it's given authors with their audience. I really deeply enjoyed that interview I had with Joe Abercrombie. I think
I could tell. Everyone could. Yeah. We could all tell. Yeah. Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me on Person Behind the Pages, the show where we get to know the authors and creators that make the things we love. I'm your host, Nicholas W. Fuller. Before I introduce my guest, let me very quickly say, check out my Patreon. I got some short stories up there that you can read. You can join for free with Patreon now. It's super cool and a great way to keep up with everything I'm doing. But let's talk to my guest. He joins me all the way from the land down under. It's Jed Herne. Hi, Jed.
Hey, Nicholas. How you going? Thanks for having me here. Really excited to chat.
Yeah. No, thank you for being here, Jed. So if you don't know Jed Herne, he's done a little bit of everything creative already. He studied as an architect and did work that way for a bit. He worked as a writer for a finance website for a while, just to kind of get be doing work as a writer of some sort. He's recently become, though, a full-time creative. He's a former host of Wizards, Warriors, and Words podcast, which was awesome. I used to watch that every week, or listen, I guess. But he's got his own YouTube channel where he talks about writing quite a bit. Definitely some good stuff there. He's got 3 published books, 1 published interactive narrative video game, and an upcoming Kickstarter for a brand new book. Jed, you've done all this and you're, what, like 26 or something?
25, and I'm exhausted just hearing all of that. That really puts into context everything that's happened.
All right, god damn, man. Well, hustling. It's good stuff. So let's jump right into things. The way that I first heard of you, Jed, was that Wizards, Warriors, and Words podcast, which is fantastic. And I know you still have the episodes on your YouTube channel, so people can check that out. I should link to that for sure. But that was you and Rob J. Hayes and Dirk Ashton and Michael R. Fletcher, supposedly giving writing advice. But at the last episode, Michael Fletcher was like, is this what we're doing? But like, you guys were all just like sort of chopping it up and having a good time. And that's what definitely had me tuning in. It was great fun. So Jed, I know that you were the driving force behind that. How did you decide on these other guests, and how, you were, the youngest of the group and the most inexperienced, right? How did you kind of draw them in?
Yeah, for sure. Just a lot of trickery, deceit, blackmail, all those things that are required to corral a bunch of authors into doing something. No, I'd actually interviewed Rob Hayes a few years before the podcast began on a separate podcast called The Novel Analyst Show, where every episode I basically took a book I really liked and tried to analyze it, pull out some key writing lessons, mostly as a way to just help myself develop my own writing craft. But on that podcast, I dabbled with interviewing a couple of authors, and one of the authors that I interviewed was Rob, and it was a messy recording. I think right before I started recording him, there was a huge thunderstorm near my house, so I had to record him on Zoom, but on my mobile phone, and it was running out of power, and it was a very messy affair, but it was a great chat. He was really, really awesome, and I thought, that guy was so much fun to talk to. Didn't really think too much about it afterwards, published the episode, went on with my life. But then a little later on, I think I was realizing, I was listening to probably podcasts with other authors on it. I think one would have been Writing Excuses with Brandon Sanderson and Dan Wells and Mary Robinette Cowell and Howard Taylor. That podcast had really inspired me a lot. Not so much for the writing advice, although that was incredible, but more for just the sense of camaraderie. Because as you know, Nicholas, writing is a very solitary game at times, and you can get really cooped up in your own head. And just listening to that podcast, it was really cool to feel like I was in this group of people who are all working towards their creative goals, all working towards bringing their novel ideas to fruition. So I thought, how hard would it be to actually create something like that for myself? And then the way that this usually happens for me is I go very deep down the rabbit hole of planning these things and asking myself, okay, well, I've chatted to a couple of authors on the podcast before. I'd love to make it, just about fantasy, because that's the genre that I'm really passionate about. That's the genre I'm writing. I wonder what other fantasy authors would be fun to do this with. And I'd talked to Rob before, so I had a bit of a rapport with him already. I'd loved his books. And I was in a group on Facebook at the time where it was basically just authors sort of talking about their books and discussions about it and that sort of thing. And one day, one of the moderators in that community was like, we're going to be hosting a few live streams, sort of ask me anything with different authors. If you're an author and you'd like to participate, chuck your name in here and you can get involved. So I thought this might be a bit of fun. I've never done sort of a live Q&A thing online before. I'd done some in person, but never online. So I put my name down for that, did the live Q&A, and the two other authors who were doing it at the same time were Dirk Ashton and Michael R. Fletcher. And I listened to their stuff and I thought, these guys just seem to have such a cool way of talking about story. They seem to have like a lot of great charisma. And I knew that they were sort of familiar with Rob and everything like that. So basically I reached out to Rob and I asked him, first of all, would you be interested in doing a podcast? I'll do all the organizing. You just have to show up and, you know, I'll guide the discussion. I'll sort of moderate it, that sort of thing. And he said yes. Second of all, I asked him, do you think Dirk and Mike could be a good fit for this? I know you know them well. Like, I have never chatted with them before, but they seemed to be really good when they were sort of discussing their writing in this group. Do you think they would be interested in doing this? And he said, yeah, sure, I can pass the word on. So that's sort of how the thing started up. We initially got on a video call and I basically gave them my pitch, which was, I'll do all the organizing work. Like, you guys just have to show up, have fun. I'll bring a discussion topic every time. Really, it's just an opportunity for us to sort of goof around and talk about writing a bit more. And I told them, and I think this was very critical for anyone who is thinking of starting up a podcast or YouTube channel or anything like that, we are just going to record 4 test episodes. We're not going to publish any of those necessarily. We're just going to record 4 test episodes to see if we enjoy this process, if we have a good rapport with each other, if we have good back and forth banter. And then at the end of that process, if we do like this, then we will actually start publishing. So we did end up publishing those initial test episodes, but I think it's really important to kind of set that expectation that, particularly with authors that are, you know, quite busy, you don't necessarily want to sign up for this massive ongoing commitment. You just want to test the waters, see if you enjoyed it. And sure enough, they enjoyed the process enough that we ended up going on to do, I think, 120 plus episodes. And it was a really awesome 2 years of recording with those guys.
That's fantastic. That's kind of a cool story. I didn't know all that background. That's neat to hear. And definitely you can tell, though, that Fletcher, you said, yeah, just show up and like goof around. He took that and ran with it, right?
I probably should have been a bit more specific, but it worked out really great in the end.
Okay, so you did Wizards, Warriors, and Words, and you did that for 2 years. That's fantastic. But you ended up kind of wrapping it up, in part because it was getting real difficult to schedule, as I understand, which makes sense because people all over the world, which was really cool while it was able to get going, but certainly made it harder, I'm sure. So, and since then, I feel like, you know, you're obviously still making YouTube videos, and they're quite successful YouTube videos, but like, to me, it sort of feels like a little bit of a shift in focus on the YouTube channel. I mean, of course it is, you know, you're not posting the podcast, which was kind of the main content for a long time, right? So talk to me a little bit about kind of the decisions that went around, you know, stopping the podcast, and then how you kind of, you know, approach your videos now.
For sure. I think the podcast was a really, really enjoyable experience, and I got to talk to some of my absolute favorite authors because of that show. I got to interview Joe Abercrombie, who's probably, you know, in my top 3 authors of all time. Got to talk to a ton of other authors as well. I won't get into naming the rest of them because there are too many, but it was really, really enjoyable experience. And I think that I'd always approach the podcast very much with the mindset of, I don't really care how many people are watching this, how many people are listening to this or whatever. I'm doing this for the conversation that I get to have with these guests and the learnings that I sort of get to have from talking to these people and sort of sharing my thoughts about writing and going back and forth with that. I think after about 2 years of doing it, one aspect that had definitely begun to take a toll was the time differences. We were always recording at times that were usually super late at night for me. I'm quite an early morning person by nature, so having to stay up to, you know, sometimes 11 or even midnight to record these sessions, it was something that was taking a bit of a toll. And in the early days, I was very happy with that. I was like, that's fine. I had a bit more time back then. You know, I could adjust the schedule. So that was one factor where I was like, I'm not sure if this is incredibly sustainable for me moving forward in the future. And certainly looking back on it now, I don't know how I was necessarily having the energy to do all of that, which was kind of crazy to think back on. But I think also at this time, I'd just gotten a lot more into YouTube and watching a lot of other creators on the platform, being very inspired by what they were doing, both within the fantasy space, like, the Daniel Greens of the world, but also on different sort of sides of YouTube as well. I watched a lot of sort of personal development, a lot of self-help YouTubers as well. And I just loved the method they kind of have where they would be testing something in their life, where they would be going through a project, and then they would just sit down and directly talk to you on camera about it for 10, 15 minutes. Like they're just a friend, they're having a conversation with you about stuff they've learned, documenting the journey and sort of their learnings along the way. So I thought it could be really fun to experiment a bit more with that sort of direct to camera stuff. Rather than with a podcast, as you're aware, you tend to talk about a lot of different things, and it tends to be quite a rambling, long, deep conversation, half an hour, whatever it is. And that's super fun. But I think there was also a craving that I had to do stuff that was a little bit more focused. I felt like at the time I'd learned a lot more as an author, and that I wanted the medium to just be able to express that directly to the audience, rather than, having to sort of structure a big, like sort of 40-minute conversation around it. Sometimes you just need to share something over the course of 5 or 10 minutes and get it directly out there. So I was looking at the time into basically this coaching program by another YouTuber called Captain Sinbad. And he had been someone I had super admired for many years. He was a personal development YouTuber, and he did a lot of cool cinematic stuff with his channel that I was like, oh, I love movies. This guy is somehow infusing like this movie level storytelling into a video that's about how to build better habits or how to improve your sleep. So he was running this group coaching program where he would basically take YouTubers on board and show them the principles he'd used to go from 0 to 500,000 subscribers. At the time, my YouTube channel was probably about 800 subscribers. Really, it was a bit of an afterthought, to be honest. Like we made the podcast, we recorded the video, and then we just plopped it up on YouTube without really, thinking about the platform or anything like that. And I still had seen the channel grow into about 800 subscribers at this time, which was cool. And I thought, maybe there's a bit of an opportunity here to experiment with just a different format and trying, some different stuff here. Also as a way to kind of like further just sort of build my author platform so that when I did get around to launching more books, there was a bit more of an audience involved so that I didn't have to shout about it on Twitter or, buy ads or anything like that, but rather had that direct relationship to an audience that knew I was writing a book and had actually been able to follow me on this journey rather than just like kind of, spamming and promoting it and that sort of thing. So I basically signed up to this program. It was a lot of money to get involved in the group coaching program, to be honest, but probably the best investment I ever made because he pretty much just sat us down, showed us all the principles he'd used to blow up his channel and to kind of grow on YouTube. And over the next year or so, it's been roughly about a year since I took that program. The channel has now grown from 800 to about 30,000 subscribers or something. And I think that has largely come from just experimenting. Yeah, it's it's kind of mind-blowing to me when I think about it. But I think it has just really come down to like, I wanted to experiment with a different format. I felt a little bit like we'd done a lot within the podcast world. I think I've done over 200 podcast episodes between the Novel Analyst Show and Wizards, Warriors and Words. And I really enjoyed it. But just over time, I thought that it was maybe getting a bit stale for me. I wanted to try new stuff. And the very first video that I made in that program with Captain Sinbad was my video where I basically wrote like Neil Gaiman for 7 days. So analyzed his writing routine, tried to implement it in my own life. I was feeling a bit stuck with the novel I was writing at the time. And I just recorded the whole thing, put it up on YouTube, and the response that it kind of got from the audience was totally different to anything I'd seen for a podcast episode before. And I think it opened my eyes to how much fun it could be to actually experiment with these different formats and basically have a sort of more like solo direction for the channel. So that's sort of how it evolved from there. And I'm really happy it did. Like I super enjoyed the podcast, but realistically, it was never that much of a consideration. We never really considered the audience that much with the podcast. It was very much just, we're going to chat about whatever we want to chat about. Like we're going to goof off, whatever. And as soon as I started thinking to myself, okay, well, what would actually be the most useful to, the prior version of me before he'd published books? If he was watching this YouTube channel, like what would be the most useful to him? And I think I realized that maybe like these sort of longer podcast discussions wouldn't be as useful as like a really tight 10-minute video that compresses everything I've learned about structuring your plot over 10 years of writing and 3 books and a video game and all that sort of thing. And sure enough, that's sort of what I've seen as the channel has grown. Just being able to make stuff that is a lot more, I think, useful to writers starting out has led to that growth. And it's, obviously led to me being able to, do it full time, which is an incredible privilege.
That's awesome. There's just so many different thoughts there. One, like I'm definitely, I feel like what you're saying resonates with me in a lot of ways. I like the podcast, and kind of going back to what you were saying before, I like that doing the podcast sort of makes me feel a little bit of community, because otherwise writing can be super isolating. I wrote a book 12 years ago that's now a trunk book, but like that felt very isolating. But now that I've gotten back into like wanting to write, and I'm like, I've got an in-person writing group, I'm like talking with people that are interesting and awesome from across the world, it's like, it's such a different experience and so much better than just toiling away alone in a room, not ever talking to anyone else, so I feel that. That's interesting too about like, the way that you're sort of changed the approach with YouTube. And I agree with you there also. My most popular video right now was one that I made in a morning while the rest of my family was still asleep, but I couldn't sleep. So I was like, well, I'm going to get up and talk about this thing that's kind of going on in the writing world. And like, sure enough, thousands of views, and like, but it's so cool to be able to kind of have that idea and implement it and talk about it and share your thoughts and do it so rapidly. Whereas, of course, writing a novel, there's no way that we could put out a novel idea in a week. It's just not feasible or possible. I don't care how fast you are. You can't do it in a week like you can a video, So super interesting. It sounds like, and tell me if this is true, a lot of YouTubers will have a kind of target audience in mind, or even like an audience avatar, right? And you were mentioning that the person that you're sort of thinking about is younger Jed, right? Jed from a few years ago. Is that sort of your target audience when you're making videos?
Yes, to a large extent, but I think these days, now that I actually work with a lot of writers and edit different authors' books and that sort of thing, I usually picture one of them when I am making my videos. I find that's really useful because I get very turned off by YouTube videos where it feels like the person is up on camera and they're like, hey guys, today we're going to talk about 5 ways to write better fantasy plots. And it feels very presentational, and it feels very much like they are aware of the fact that they are talking to, an audience of hundreds or thousands of people or whatever it is. I think whenever I'm trying to record a video, I'm always thinking about this coaching client that I was chatting to about his book the other day, or this coaching client who I was giving her feedback on her character arcs the other day. And I think that has really helped a lot, because it means that when you sort of give that specific advice to one person, it's never just that one person that is struggling with that issue. Like, you can guarantee that most other new writers are running into the exact same things. And a lot of the videos on the channel where I talk about, plot mistakes that I see new authors make, or world building mistakes that I see new authors make, those videos are kind of easy to make in a sense, because I've just seen so many repeated mistakes and very common patterns in all these authors that I've worked with. So that is probably the avatar that I'm kind of thinking of when I am making these videos. That's cool.
And clearly it's working out for you, because now you're a full-time creator. You've replaced I think you've completely replaced your day job income before you left. And so congratulations. Also, #goals. So what is your daily routine like now? Of course, well, I mean, obviously you were just doing a bunch of traveling, so that's kind of, but what is it when you're home? What is your daily routine like?
Honestly, it's all over the place. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think one of the greatest parts about having a day job as a writer or a creator is it gives you a certain structure. It gives you a grounding principle behind your life. I think when weirdly, I was probably more productive sometimes when I had, a 4-day-a-week day job, and it forced me to have to be getting up every morning and blocking out time for writing and that sort of thing. And I think I'm still adjusting to the new reality of you kind of have all this time to spend how you want, which can be a little bit overwhelming. So generally though, I try to go for a walk early in the morning, try to get that sort of sunlight just to wake up and to start moving. Then I usually try to focus on my sort of most important task at the beginning of the day. So often that's writing. Really for the last few months, it's been more sort of editing. It's been trying to get Kingdom of Dragons ready to launch on Kickstarter, which is the next fantasy book. So there hasn't actually been a ton of like new writing in the last few months. But the thing that I always have to remind myself is like, this is just as an important part of the process as putting words down in the first draft. Because if you don't figure out how to promote the book, how to sort of get it out there and edit it in a way that attracts readers and everything, then it doesn't really matter like how many words you're putting down, that sort of thing.
Right. Right.
And then, usually like afternoons are more working on YouTube video stuff, probably editing books for clients and that sort of thing. But really, this is a big thing I do need to work on a bit more, just because it's still, I think, quite disrupted. I've only been back in Perth for a few days after a month of travel. So still trying to figure out what the routine looks like, and just developing like the new habits around the situation that I'm in.
Fair. Yeah, I remember, like I said, when I was writing that book 12 years ago, I had a ton of time, and it wasn't always very productive. But yeah, when you're like, okay, I've got like 2 hours, let's actually get something done. You know, it can be a lot more motivating. So I want to get into kind of talking about, your favorite parts of the process, or maybe favorite experience you've had. But before we get into that, and then also get into kind of the Kickstarter and the new book, tell me a little bit, now that you're like full time, you were just traveling for a month. Also, I know that you like to do rock climbing, which seems like a pretty rad way to work out. So how did these sort of fit into your life now, even though you're just sort of figuring it out? And like, how awesome was it to go travel for a month,
It ruled. I feel very lucky to be able to do it. It was a lot of fun. I was basically, so I live in Perth, which for those of you who don't know, it's on the west coast of Australia. It's about a 5-hour flight from Sydney, which was my first destination. I was there for a week. Then I went over to the US for 2 weeks, did a bit of a road trip with some friends around the northeast, and then came back to Perth. Immediately went out of Perth a few hours for my friend's wedding. So that was sort of the extent of the travel. Being able to do these other things, whether it's travel or stuff like rock climbing, I think is a very important part of my writing process, because I think that it's difficult to be creative when you're just sitting in front of your computer, chained to the desk, staring at the screen. Absolutely, that is an important part of the process, and the words are never going to write themselves while you're rock climbing or traveling or doing all these sort of things. But it's those experiences that I think really replenish the creative well and really give you a lot of just different experiences and different stories to draw from when it comes to actually writing. And in particular, I think for a lot of young authors, it's very important to make sure you are living outside of your writing so that you actually have your own unique experiences to draw upon. I think that's why I feel grateful for the fact that, I suppose even though I am young, 25 and that sort of thing, I do feel like I have lived a lot of different lives sort of before I've come to the writing, whether it's the work I did in architecture or the various travel I did. I did exchange for probably 6 months over to London when I was younger. And all these different experiences, I think, give you a certain unique lens to view the world when it comes to your writing. And it's important, particularly if you're a young writer, to be getting into those new experiences, saying yes to those adventures, saying yes to new stuff, and just experimenting with a lot of different ways of like kind of living and viewing the world, so that when it comes time to actually writing your stories, you're able to draw from a place of truth, and you're not just relying on copying what you've seen in movies or copying what you've seen in books, but rather you actually have a certain amount of stored experiences from your own life that you can draw inspiration from.
Love that. Someone much wiser than me, some point, I can't place the quote, but somebody said, either write a story worth reading or live a life worth having a story about,
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally agree that, those sorts of experience are great to sort of fill the well. Awesome. So you tell me a couple of different approaches here to this question. I'd love to hear what your favorite part of the writing process is, or perhaps your favorite sort of experience that you've had that's come about from being an author. Like, so not the rock climbing, but maybe a con that you would have never gone to had you not been an author or something. Or maybe it was the podcast, whatever, your choice.
That's a really good question.
I
think I really deeply enjoyed that interview I had with Joe Abercrombie. I think
I could tell. Everyone could tell.
Yeah.
We could all tell. Yeah.
You can see how much I'm nerding out there.
Yeah.
And watching back that, I'm like, oh, you're so awkward or whatever. But it was
No.
really
Yeah. No, your passion came through, and that's always, that's the best. That's the best.
Yeah, I think it was just a pretty unreal experience, right? To kind of be like, this is a person who I've probably had read 10 or 11 of his books at that point, had been a huge inspiration to me as a writer, someone I really looked up to for a while, and then to like be chatting to him and for him to be chatting back and stuff. It was absolutely ludicrous. And yeah, that was like an absolutely incredible experience that wouldn't have happened without obviously the podcast. I think in terms of my favorite writing experience, it's hard to say. I think it's difficult to pick out one moment, but it's probably just whenever you're in a first draft session and you're writing stuff down, and you have that moment where your brain switches from this is a chore, this is what I need to do, and it just clicks over into that point where the story begins to kind of flow out of its own mind, and it doesn't feel like you are constructing it anymore, but it feels like it's just coming out of you and you're the conduit into it. And then you look up and you've written 2,000 words and you know that they were good and that they won't need to change later on. I think every time I have one of those experiences, those are my favorite moments when it comes to writing. And it's difficult to pinpoint one specific one because, it's something that happens sporadically and you're not always thinking about it. But it's probably those moments there. And then in terms of like my favorite part of the writing process, I think they're all good for different reasons. There's definitely some parts which maybe feel more painful than others, but it would probably be outlining. I think joy of discovering the story. Okay. Yeah, like the joy of discovering the story for the first time, and basically going through that experience of, okay, what if the characters did this? What if they did this? How does my world fit into this? Like, okay, I've got these ideas for the characters. What plot makes sense for them? What theme makes sense for them? And sort of building everything kind of around that. And I think I'm conscious of outlining a lot because at the moment I'm sort of running a bit of a group coaching program for some other writers, taking them through my outlining process. So it's been something that's been on my mind quite a bit. But yeah, I just really love it. And I think it's just the freedom of being able to experiment with all these different approaches to your novel without necessarily having to commit to nail down one. And once you kind of get that outline working really well, it's an immensely satisfying feeling because okay, great. Now I actually get to bring this story to life and I know that it's probably going to work.
Yeah, love that. I was just dictating some outline just literally yesterday for the book I'm writing, like kind of the last half of it. I knew where it was going to end up, but I wasn't quite sure how it was going to get there. And I was like, brainstorming that. I'm like, okay, now I feel like, and I'm also with you. Yeah, I feel like the best part of writing is when the words are flowing and then you kind of get to the point where you stop and you're like, oh, those are good words too.
Yes.
Those are right. All right, very cool. So, Jed, Kingdom of Dragons, new book coming up, be your fourth book. Is this in a series or is it a standalone? And you're doing a Kickstarter. Tell us why you're doing a Kickstarter and what we can expect, and give me all the juicy details.
For sure. So Kingdom of Dragons is the start of a new epic fantasy series about dragon riders and warring nations. I'm doing Kickstarter because I really like the sort of direct connection that it's given authors with their audience. And obviously over the last few years, we've seen some awesome Kickstarters out there. Like behind me, I've got a few of Sanderson's Kickstarter special editions up here somewhere. And we're probably all familiar with like how well that did, but I've been sort of more inspired by seeing a lot of the smaller authors who maybe aren't household names, but are maybe people that I know who have decided to use Kickstarter as a way to get that more direct connection with their readers, not have to go through Amazon, not have to go through kind of a middleman. And through that process, they're able to create something that is higher quality because on Kickstarter, you can basically know how many people want to order your book. Then you can do a big bulk printing of it, which means that you can print it at a better price, but better quality. And then also it's allowed for a lot of authors to, bring in artwork into their books. Right now we're in the process of getting some interior art done for Kingdom of Dragons, which is just an absolutely incredible process to be able to see these scenes that you have been thinking about for 2 years and you have such a clear picture in your head. And then your artist comes along, sketches it out, and you go, oh my gosh, this is this is exactly what I was imagining. It's like I'm seeing a dream brought to life. So I think the reason I'm going with Kickstarter is, yeah, really just to experiment with like a different way of publishing. You know, I've done self-publishing with a video game that was published by another company, so it's sort of traditional publishing. And then I really like the aspect of just being able to directly connect with your audience and to build something that is better than what you could do by just publishing it yourself. Hopefully with the Kickstarter, you know, depending on how it goes, I've structured it in a way that as the funding increases for the Kickstarter, we'll be able to get more interior artwork, you know, some other sort of add-ons and goodies for the book as well. So I really like the aspect of just the direct connection with the readers and, you know, being able to create like a higher quality book that really brings your dreams to life in a way that I don't think is necessarily possible if you are just self-publishing it and just funding it all out of your own pocket, or even if you're working with a traditional publisher. Not many traditional publishers are going to let you have a bunch of artwork sort of spread throughout your book and everything.
Right. Yep, very true. Are you going, you know, how many different editions of the book are going to be in your Kickstarter? Ebook,
paperback, hardcover, and depending on how we do with funding, possibly audiobook. I think at this stage, I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know when this video comes out, so this might change or whatever, but aiming to have the audiobooks as a stretch goal for the story.
Very cool. So this already sounds exciting. Love, you know, dragons. Give me that trilogy. Love it. Can you tell me, though, you had like a nice tight pitch for the book? Do you have that? Can you give that to us? I'd love to hear it from you.
I'll do my best to remember it. So, yeah, Kingdom of Dragons is basically about a spy on a crusade of vengeance and this young dragon rider girl who is trying to destroy the nation that killed her father. So, essentially in the story, we have our two main characters. One of them is Zora. She's a ranger's apprentice whose father died as a result of a rival kingdom's actions many years ago. She finds a dragon egg and is taken into Elysium, this floating city in the sky where the dragon riders of Alatia all train. And she sees this as her opportunity to finally sort of get justice and revenge on her father's killer, who is now the emperor of the rival kingdom next door. Meanwhile, in that rival kingdom, we have a young boy called Rovan. Dragons killed one of his best friends during a war many years ago, and he basically sets a course to steal a dragon egg, become a dragon rider, infiltrate this dragon rider academy that floats in the sky, and destroy it from within.
Wow. Drama. Love it. Yeah, lots going on there. Lots going on. Boy, I'm excited to see where that all plays out. And we'll get to see it, of course, with the Kickstarter and then across multiple books.
Yes.
Dang. All right. Well, Jed, I think that's a great place to kind of end things. Yeah, thank you for being here. Where can people find and follow you online? And, of course, you got to plug the Kickstarter, too. Where can they find the Kickstarter?
Yeah, for sure. So if you just search Kingdom of Dragons on Kickstarter, it should come right up. I don't know when this video releases, but the Kickstarter begins on November the 2nd, and it runs for about 28 days, so it finishes around the end of November. Fingers crossed it does well. I'm really excited for it, but I've never done a Kickstarter before, so I have no idea how it will go. On that page as well, you should be able to read some of the opening chapters for free. So if you want to sample a little bit of what the story's about, check out the Kickstarter and you can see it all there. And then apart from the Kickstarter, I'm on YouTube as well. Just search my name, Jed Herne. And basically on the channel I share the writing advice and sort of behind the scenes look at the process, just based on my experience of writing my different novels and all of that. So that's a really good place to check it out if you're a writer and you're sort of wanting to go a little bit deeper with some of the things I've learned. And yeah, really great pleasure to be here, Nicholas.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you like this video, please give me that like, that subscribe, that comment. That all helps in the algorithm, helps me get to do more of these things. If no one's told you today, you're an absolute legend.